Elena's hands were shaking before she even stepped into the great hall. She could feel it already, the pull in her chest, the invisible thread tightening between her heart and someone she had never met. It was the bond. It had woken inside her that morning, like a fire lit under her ribs, and it had not stopped burning since. Every wolf in the Blackthorn pack could feel that something had shifted. A mate had been found. And in a pack like Blackthorn, that was not a private matter. It was an event. The hall was already full when she arrived, torches burning along the stone walls, the scent of pine and smoke thick in the air. Rows of pack members stood shoulder to shoulder, whispering, watching, waiting. At the far end of the room, seated on a high wooden chair that looked more like a throne than a seat, was Alpha Damien Voss. Elena had heard stories about him her whole life. The Alpha who took control of Blackthorn at 23, after his father's sudden death. The Alpha who never smiled in public, never lost a fight, and never let anyone see what he was thinking. People said his eyes were the color of frozen lake water, beautiful and dangerous at the same time. Sitting there now, watching her walk toward him, she understood why they said that. She stopped several feet away, the way pack custom required, and lowered her eyes for a moment, before lifting them again. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. "You feel it too," she said quietly. It was not really a question. Damien's jaw tightened. For one heartbeat, something flickered behind his eyes, something that almost looked like recognition, like relief, like the same pull she felt roaring through her own chest. Then it was gone, replaced by something colder. "I feel something," he said. His voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man who had learned a long time ago never to show weakness in front of his pack. "That does not mean I accept it." A murmur moved through the crowd. Elena felt her stomach drop. "Damien," someone near the throne started to say, an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes, clearly one of his advisors, but Damien raised a hand, and the man fell silent immediately. "I am the Alpha of this pack," Damien said, standing now, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the hall. "I do not answer to instinct. I do not answer to fate. I answer to what is best for Blackthorn." He looked at Elena, and for a moment, his eyes swept over her, the way someone studies an object they are about to discard. "You come from nothing. No pack behind you. No strength to offer. No alliance to bring. Whatever the bond says, I reject you." The words hit her like a physical blow. She felt the room tilt slightly, felt the collective gasp of the crowd around her, felt something inside her chest tear, in a way she knew would never fully heal. Rejection was not just words. It was a wound that lived in the body, a wolf's oldest and cruelest punishment, and it hurt more than she had ever imagined it could. But she did not cry. She would not give him that. Instead, she lifted her chin, met his cold blue eyes one last time, and said the only thing she had left. "Then I release you too." She turned and walked out of the hall, back straight, step steady, even though her whole body wanted to fold in on itself. Behind her, she heard whispers rising like a wave, heard someone say her name in shock, heard the scrape of Damien's chair as he sat back down like nothing important had happened at all. What none of them knew, not the whispering crowd, not the silver-haired advisor, not even Damien himself, was that Elena was already carrying his child. She had discovered it only 2 days earlier, a small private miracle. She had planned to tell him the moment the bond was confirmed. She had imagined 100 different ways that conversation might go. She had never imagined this one. Now, standing outside the great hall with the cold night air hitting her face, she pressed a hand against her stomach and made a decision that would shape the rest of her life. She would not tell him. Not after this. Not after being discarded in front of an entire pack like something unwanted found on the side of the road. She would protect this child alone. The walk back to the small guest quarters at the edge of pack territory felt endless. Every step, every shadow, every distant howl reminded her that she did not belong here anymore, if she ever had. She packed quickly, the few belongings she had brought with her fitting easily into one worn bag. There was nothing here for her, no family, no pack loyalty. Nothing but a rejection that still burned like an open flame beneath her skin, and a secret that beat quietly beneath her heart. She left before sunrise, before anyone would notice she was gone, before Damien could change his mind and decide, out of pride or curiosity, that he wanted to know more about the woman fate had chosen for him. She did not want to be found, not by him, not by his pack, not by anyone who might see her child as a political problem to be solved, rather than a person to be loved. The human world outside Blackthorn territory was loud and bright and completely indifferent to wolves and their bonds and their rejections. Elena found that indifference strangely comforting. Nobody here knew what a mate bond was. Nobody here would look at her with pity or judgment. She could simply be a woman, quietly building a new life, and no one would ask questions. She found work at a small bakery in a town 3 states away from anything she had ever known, kneading dough before sunrise, learning to smile at customers, even when her heart still ached in ways she did not fully understand. The bakery owner, a warm, no-nonsense woman named Priya, never asked too many questions, which was exactly what Elena needed. Months passed, her body changed. The child inside her grew stronger, and so, in strange and unexpected ways, did she. There were nights when the pain of the rejection returned so sharply she could barely breathe, when she would wake from dreams of cold blue eyes and a voice that said the words that broke her without a single moment of hesitation. But there were also mornings, quiet and golden, when she would place her hand on her stomach and feel a small kick, a small reminder that she was not entirely alone, and something in her would settle. She thought about Damien sometimes, more than she wanted to admit. She wondered if he ever thought about her, if the bond haunted him the way it haunted her, if some part of him regretted the words he had spoken so easily in front of his entire pack. She told herself it did not matter. He had made his choice clear. She would build a life where that choice could never touch her or her child again. As her due date approached, Elena moved once more, this time to a small, quiet town, far from any wolf territory she knew of. A place where the woods were ordinary woods, and the moon was just the moon. She rented a tiny apartment above a hardware store, found work answering phones for a local clinic, and prepared, in the best way a person can prepare, for a life she never expected to be living alone. On a cold evening in early spring, in a small hospital room with no family waiting outside, Elena gave birth to a son. She named him Kai, a name that meant nothing to any pack, a name that belonged only to the two of them. When the nurse placed him in her arms, and she looked down at his tiny face, she felt something shift inside her, something powerful and unshakable. Whatever pain Damien had caused her, whatever rejection still lived somewhere beneath her ribs, none of it mattered anymore compared to this. She would protect this boy with everything she had, no matter what it cost her. Outside the hospital window, the moon hung low and full over the quiet town, silver light spilling across rooftops that had no idea a wolf's true heir had just been born beneath them, hidden from the pack that would have claimed him, safe in the arms of the mother his father had thrown away. Elena held her son close and made a silent promise into the darkness. He would grow up knowing love, not rejection. He would grow up strong, not ashamed. And if fate ever decided to bring Damien Voss back into their lives, she would be ready. But for now, there was only this moment, this small warm weight in her arms, and the quiet, fierce beginning of a new life neither of them would ever have to face alone. 5 years is a long time to keep a secret, but Elena had learned how to do it well. She and Kai lived in a small yellow house at the edge of a quiet town called Millbrook, the kind of place where neighbors waved from their porches, and nobody asked too many questions about a young mother raising her son alone. Elena worked as a receptionist at the local veterinary clinic during the day and took in sewing work at night, and between the two jobs, she had built a life that was steady, if not always easy. Kai was unlike other children, in ways Elena tried hard not to notice, because noticing meant remembering things she had worked hard to forget. He ran faster than boys twice his age. He could hear his mother's car turning onto their street from 3 blocks away. His eyes, a striking shade of blue that reminded Elena more than she wanted of someone she never spoke of, seemed to see things other children missed entirely. She told herself these were just quirks, a gifted child, a fast runner, nothing more. That comfortable denial ended on a bright Tuesday afternoon in the schoolyard. Elena was called into the principal's office after lunch, her stomach twisting with worry the entire drive over. When she arrived, she found Kai sitting quietly on a bench outside the office, his small hands folded in his lap, looking more confused and upset. "He didn't hurt anyone," the principal explained carefully. glancing at Kai with an expression Elena could not quite read. But something happened on the playground that I think you should know about. According to 3 separate teachers, 2 older boys had been fighting near the swings, shoving each other hard enough that one had fallen and scraped his arm badly. Before anyone could intervene, Kai had stepped between them, and in a voice far too commanding for a 5-year-old, said a single word. "Stop." And they had stopped. Immediately. Completely. As if some invisible hand had reached out and pulled them apart. It was strange, the teacher supervising recess admitted, looking almost embarrassed to say it out loud. Both boys said afterward that they just couldn't keep fighting, like something told them to stop, and their bodies listened before their minds even caught up. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. She knew exactly what that was. She had grown up around wolves long enough to recognize an alpha's command voice when she heard it, even secondhand, even filtered through the confused retelling of elementary school teachers who had no idea what they had just witnessed. It was not something that could be taught. It was not something a 5-year-old should have been able to do at all, unless the power in his blood was far stronger than she had ever let herself imagine. She drove home in silence, Kai's small voice occasionally filling the quiet with questions she barely had the strength to answer. That night, after tucking him into bed, she sat alone at her kitchen table and allowed herself to think, really think, about what this meant. Kai was not simply Damien's biological son. He was showing signs of alpha power at an age when most shifters had not even had their first shift. That kind of power did not happen by accident. It happened in bloodlines carrying deep, ancient strength. The kind of bloodline that belonged to true pack leaders. The kind of bloodline that made a child not just wanted, but valuable, in ways that had nothing to do with love, and everything to do with power and politics. Elena had spent 5 years telling herself that hiding was enough, that distance alone could keep them both safe. That night, staring at her own tired reflection in the dark kitchen window, she understood for the first time just how fragile that safety really was. Meanwhile, nearly 1,000 miles away, life inside Blackthorn territory had grown quietly unbearable for Damien Voss. On the surface, everything appeared exactly as pack law required. 2 years after Elena's departure, Damien had entered a political mating with Celine Cole, daughter of a neighboring alpha, a union designed to strengthen Blackthorn's northern borders and secure peace with a pack that had once been a rival. Celine was intelligent, composed, and undeniably beautiful, everything a pack council could want in a future Luna. But there had been no bond between them, not even the faintest thread of one, and after 2 years of marriage, there was still no heir. The pack elders had begun to speak in hushed, worried tones about succession, about strength, about the uncomfortable truth that a leader without an heir was a leader whose pack's future stood on unstable ground. Damien heard the whispers even when no one said them directly to his face. He was alpha. Whispers always found their way back to him eventually. He told himself the lack of a bond with Celine did not matter. Bonds were inconvenient things, unpredictable and dangerous, capable of making even strong alphas do foolish things. He had made the right decision 5 years ago, he reminded himself constantly, rejecting a bond that would have tied Blackthorn's future to an Omega, with no pack, no allies, no strength to offer beyond the accident of fate. And yet, there were nights, more of them lately than he cared to admit, when sleep refused to come, when he lay awake in a bed that felt colder than it should, and found himself thinking of a woman, with steady brown eyes, who had looked at him with more courage than fear, even as he tore her world apart in front of an entire pack. He remembered the exact words he had used. He remembered the way her chin had lifted instead of dropped, the way she had said, "Then I release you too," instead of breaking down and begging, the way that quiet dignity had stayed with him far longer than he ever expected it to. He never spoke her name aloud, not to Celine, not to his advisors, not even to himself in the privacy of his own thoughts if he could help it. But the bond, rejected or not, had never fully disappeared. It lived somewhere beneath his skin like a low ember that refused to go out, flaring painfully at the strangest moments, reminding him constantly of a choice he was no longer entirely certain had been the right one. His closest advisor, an older wolf named Garrick who had served Damien's father before him, was the only one who dared to speak plainly about it. "An alpha without an heir is an alpha with a target on his back," Garrick said one evening, standing in the doorway of Damien's study, while Damien stared at a stack of unread reports, without seeing a single word on the page. You know this. The council knows this. Sooner or later, someone is going to ask the question none of us want to ask out loud. And what question is that? Damien asked, though he already knew the answer. Whether Blackthorn's Alpha made a mistake 5 years ago, Garrick said quietly. And whether that mistake is still out there somewhere, raising a child who might carry more Blackthorn blood in his veins than anyone currently standing in this castle. Damien's head snapped up. That is not something to speculate about. I am not speculating, Garrick said, holding his gaze steadily. I am telling you what the council will start asking eventually, whether you want them to or not. A rejected bond does not erase what was already set in motion before the rejection happened. You know that as well as I do. The words settled over Damien like a weight he had spent 5 years trying to avoid carrying. He had never allowed himself to consider the possibility directly, had buried it beneath pride and duty, and the comfortable belief that his choice had been final and complete. But sitting there now, in the quiet of his study, with Garrick's careful words hanging in the air, he felt something crack open inside him that he was not prepared for. A child, his child, potentially, somewhere out in the world, growing up without a father, without a pack, without any knowledge of the power that might already be stirring inside him. Find her, Damien said finally, his voice low and rough in a way it rarely was. Quietly, I want to know if there is a child. I want to know before the council does. Garrick studied him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, before nodding once and leaving the room without another word. Damien sat alone in the growing darkness, the ember beneath his skin flaring hotter than it had in years, and for the first time since the night he had rejected Elena in front of his entire pack, he allowed himself to wonder whether pride had cost him something he could never fully get back. The man who found them did not look like a threat at all, which was exactly why Elena did not notice the danger until it was already too late. His name was Owen, and he arrived in Millbrook on a warm Saturday morning, with the easy, unhurried manner of someone simply passing through. He rented a room above the diner on Main Street, ate breakfast at the counter, and made polite conversation with anyone willing to talk to him. Nobody in town found him strange. Nobody suspected that he had been sent by Blackthorn's council specifically to search quiet human towns along the eastern corridor, looking for any sign of an unclaimed wolf child with unusually strong instincts. He found Kai on his 3rd day in town, at the community park 2 streets over from the yellow house Elena called home. Kai was playing with a group of boys near the basketball court when an argument broke out over whose turn it was to shoot. Voices rose. One of the older boys, easily twice Kai's size, shoved him hard enough to knock him to the ground. For a moment, Owen, sitting on a nearby bench pretending to read a newspaper, expected the small boy to cry, the way any ordinary 5-year-old would. Instead, Kai stood up, dusted off his knees, and looked at the older boy with an expression far too calm and steady for a child his age. Don't do that again, Kai said, and his voice, though small, carried a strange undertone that made every child on that court freeze in place, including the older boy who had shoved him. Owen lowered his newspaper slowly, every instinct in his body coming alert at once. He had heard command voices before, plenty of times, in the training halls of Blackthorn. He recognized what he was witnessing immediately, and it took every bit of his self-control not to react visibly. A 5-year-old with an alpha's command voice was not simply unusual, it was almost unheard of. Command voices typically did not fully emerge until a wolf's first shift, usually around 13 or 14 years old, and even then, most wolves never developed one strong enough to affect others outside their own bloodline. What Owen had just witnessed suggested a bloodline of extraordinary strength, the kind that ran through only a handful of packs in the entire region. He watched Kai for the rest of the afternoon, careful to keep his distance, memorizing details. The boy's dark hair, the unmistakable ice-blue eyes, the confident way he moved, entirely unaware of how unusual he was. When a woman finally arrived to collect him, calling his name across the park, in a voice tight with the particular worry only a protective mother carries, Owen watched her carefully too. She was younger than he expected, pretty in a plain, unassuming way, dressed in simple clothes that suggested modest means rather than any connection to pack wealth or status. But there was something in the careful, alert way she scanned the park before relaxing, something in the protective way she pulled her son close, that told Owen she had spent years being careful. Years hiding. He did not approach them. He simply watched them walk home together, noted the address of the small yellow house at the corner of Birch Street, and returned to his room above the diner to send a message back to Blackthorn that would change everything. The message reached Garrick 2 days later, and Garrick brought it to Damien immediately, without waiting, without softening the details, because some news could not wait for careful delivery. "He has her command voice," Garrick said, standing across the desk from Damien, watching his alpha's face carefully. "No, that is not right. He has something stronger." Owen watched him stop a fight between two boys with a single word. "At 5 years old, Damien, that is not something that happens by chance." Damien sat perfectly still, his hands flat against the surface of his desk, his mind moving through the implications faster than he could fully process them. 5 years. A son he had never known about, growing up in some quiet human town, carrying power that should not have been possible at his age, unless the bloodline behind it was extraordinary. Unless it was his own bloodline, doubled and strengthened by whatever ran through Elena's family line that neither of them had ever fully understood. "Are you certain," Damien said slowly, "that this child is mine?" "I am certain of nothing, until you see him yourself," Garrick said honestly. "But the timing matches, the appearance matches, from what Owen described, and there is no other explanation for power, like that appearing in a child, with no known pack connection." He paused, watching Damien's face carefully. "The council does not know yet. I made sure of that, but it will not stay quiet for long. Not once word spreads that Owen was sent looking in the first place. You need to decide what you are going to do, and you need to decide quickly." Damien stood and walked to the window of his study, looking out over the dark forest that surrounded Blackthorn's main compound, the same forest he had grown up running through as a child himself, before the weight of leadership had settled permanently onto his shoulders. Somewhere out there, 1,000 miles away in a town he had never heard of, a boy who might be his son was growing up without ever knowing what he truly was. The thought hit him harder than he expected. He had told himself for 5 years that rejecting Elena had been the right decision, the necessary decision, the choice that any responsible alpha would have made in his position. He had built an entire identity around that certainty, using it to justify a marriage without a bond, using it to explain away the ember that still burned quietly beneath his skin whenever he let his guard down enough to feel it. But a child changed everything. A child was not politics or pride or pack strategy. A child was a person, a small, real, living person, who existed because of a bond Damien had thrown away, who had spent 5 years growing up without a father because of words spoken too quickly, too coldly, in front of an audience that mattered more to Damien in that moment than the woman standing in front of him. "I want to see him," Damien said finally, his voice quiet but absolutely certain. "Both of them. I need to see this for myself." "And Celine?" Garrick asked carefully. "What do we tell her?" Damien's jaw tightened. His marriage to Celine had never been built on love, only necessity, and both of them had always understood that plainly, even if neither had ever said it aloud. But an announcement like this, a rejected mate resurfacing with a potential heir in tow, would shake more than just his household. It would shake the entire foundation of Blackthorn's current political structure. "Nothing. For now," Damien said. "Not until I know the truth." Garrick nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "And if the truth is what Owen believes it to be? If this boy truly is your son, and truly does carry that kind of power?" Damien did not answer immediately. He thought of Elena's steady brown eyes, the quiet dignity in her voice as she released him in front of everyone. The years he had spent afterward telling himself that decision had cost him nothing important. He thought of a 5-year-old boy he had never met, carrying his blood and his power, growing up somewhere without ever knowing his father's face. "Then everything changes," Damien said quietly. "Everything." 3 days later, Damien left Blackthorn territory for the first time in over a year, traveling not as an alpha with an entourage and guards, but quietly, alone, dressed in plain clothes that made him look like any other traveler passing through small American towns. Garrick had argued against the secrecy, insisting an alpha should never travel unprotected, but Damien had been firm. Whatever he found at the end of this journey, he wanted to face it as a man first, not as a title. The drive to Millbrook took 2 full days. Damien spent most of it in silence, watching unfamiliar landscapes pass outside the car window, feeling something he had not allowed himself to feel in years: uncertainty. As Alpha, he was accustomed to making decisions with absolute confidence, projecting a strength that never wavered in front of his pack. But this was different. This was not a matter of pack strategy or territorial disputes. This was a woman he had wronged deeply, and possibly a son who had every right to hate him before ever knowing him. When he finally arrived on the outskirts of Millbrook, parking his car a few streets away from the address Owen had provided, Damien sat behind the wheel for a long time, simply breathing, trying to steady the unfamiliar unease rising in his chest. Then he stepped out of the car and walked toward the small yellow house at the corner of Birch Street, toward a door he had no right to knock on, and a life he had no idea how to face. Elena was in the kitchen washing dishes when the knock came. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening, dinner just finished. Kai in the living room stacking wooden blocks into a tower taller than himself, while cartoons played quietly on the television. Elena dried her hands on a dish towel and walked to the front door without any sense of what was about to happen, expecting perhaps a neighbor, or a delivery, or nothing important at all. When she opened the door and saw who was standing on her porch, the dish towel slipped from her fingers and fell silently to the floor. 5 years had changed him. His face was harder now, more lined with the weight of leadership, and something in his eyes looked tired in a way she had never seen before. But it was unmistakably him, Damien Voss, standing on her porch, in Millbrook, 1,000 miles from anywhere he should have been. For a long, terrible moment, neither of them spoke. Elena's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her own ears, old pain and old anger rising together in a wave she had spent 5 years trying to bury. "How did you find us?" she finally managed, her voice tighter than she intended. Elena, her name in his voice, after so many years of silence, hit her harder than she expected. "I need to talk to you, please." Behind her, she heard the soft padding of small feet, and her stomach dropped as Kai appeared in the hallway, curious about the voices at the door. Elena moved instinctively, placing herself between her son and the man on the porch, every protective instinct in her body flaring at once. Damien's eyes moved past her, and Elena watched, with a mixture of dread and something she refused to name, as his gaze landed on Kai for the first time. She saw the exact moment recognition hit him, saw his entire body go still, his breath catch, his cold, composed expression crack open in a way she had never witnessed before, not even on the night he rejected her in front of his entire pack. He was looking at a small boy with dark hair and ice-blue eyes that were unmistakably, undeniably, his own. "He's mine," Damien said quietly. It was not a question. Elena's hands curled into fists at her sides. "You have no right," she said, her voice shaking now with 5 years of buried anger finally breaking free. "No right at all, to walk up to my door, after everything you said to me, and stand there acting like you have any claim to anything in this house." "Elena, please, just let me explain." "Explain what?" Her voice rose, sharp enough that Kai took a small step backward, uncertain, sensing the tension even if he did not understand it. Elena caught herself, took a breath, softened her tone slightly for her son's sake, even as her eyes stayed hard and unforgiving on Damien's face. "You made your choice 5 years ago, in front of your whole pack. You didn't want to bond with someone you thought was beneath you. Fine. You got exactly what you wanted. We don't need anything from you now." "I didn't know," Damien said, and there was something raw and unguarded in his voice that Elena had never heard from him before. Not once, not even in the brief days before everything fell apart. "I swear to you, I didn't know you were carrying a child when I said what I said. If I had known." "It wouldn't have changed anything," Elena cut in, her voice like ice. "You didn't reject me because of what you knew. You rejected me because of who you thought I was. Nothing. No pack. No power. No use to you. A child wouldn't have changed that math for you, Damien. It would have just given you one more problem to solve." Damien flinched, actually flinched, as though her words had physical weight behind them, and for a moment Elena almost felt something close to satisfaction, at finally being able to say out loud everything she had carried silently for 5 long years. Almost. Kai tugged gently at her sleeve. Mommy? Who is that? The question hung in the air, simple and innocent, and utterly devastating. Elena looked down at her son's curious face, then back up at Damien, who was staring at Kai, with an expression of such naked longing that it almost softened the anger, sitting like a stone in her chest. Elena hesitated, unsure how to answer, unsure how much truth a 5-year-old could handle in a single conversation on a Tuesday evening in front of a stranger who had appeared without warning at their door. I'm someone who should have been part of your life a long time ago, Damien said gently, crouching down slowly to bring himself closer to Kai's height, moving with a careful slowness Elena had never seen from him, as if he understood instinctively that this small boy deserved gentleness he had never bothered offering his mother. I'm very sorry that I wasn't. Kai studied him with the frank, unfiltered curiosity only children possess, tilting his head slightly. You have the same eyes as me, he observed. Something in Damien's expression cracked further, and Elena had to look away, unable to watch the raw emotion crossing his face, unwilling to let herself feel sympathy for a man who had caused her so much pain. Yes, Damien said quietly, I do. Elena stepped forward, gently pulling Kai back against her side. You need to leave, she said to Damien, her voice firm, even though something inside her chest felt like it was breaking apart all over again. This isn't a conversation we're having tonight. Not with him standing here. Damien rose slowly to his feet, and for a moment, Elena thought he might argue, might use the same commanding authority that controlled an entire pack to try to force his way into a conversation she was not ready to have. Instead, he simply nodded, though the reluctance in the motion was obvious. I'm staying at the inn on Main Street, he said quietly. I'm not going anywhere, Elena, not until we talk properly. But I won't push tonight. You deserve that much control at least. He turned and walked back down the porch steps, moving slower than usual, glancing back once toward the doorway where Kai still stood watching him with open curiosity. Elena closed the door firmly and leaned against it, her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her. 5 years of careful control unraveling all at once in the quiet of her own front hallway. Mommy, Kai said softly, looking up at her with concern. Are you okay? Elena forced a smile, kneeling down to hug her son close, breathing in the familiar comfort of him, the one steady thing in a world that had just been turned completely upside down. I'm okay, sweetheart, she said, though her voice trembled slightly with the lie. Everything is okay. But as she held him there in the quiet hallway, her mind raced through everything that had just happened, everything that was about to change. Damien knew about Kai now. There was no putting that truth back into hiding, no erasing what he had seen with his own eyes on their front porch. Whatever careful, quiet life she had built for the two of them over the last 5 years, it had just cracked wide open, and there was no telling yet what would come rushing through. Somewhere across town, in a small room above the local inn, Damien sat on the edge of an unfamiliar bed, staring at nothing, replaying over and over the image of a small boy with his own eyes, looking up at him, with innocent curiosity, instead of the anger and hatred Damien felt he deserved. 5 years. He had missed 5 years of that boy's life. First steps, first words, every small, ordinary miracle of childhood, all of it lost to a decision made in a moment of pride he now understood, with painful clarity, had cost him more than he ever imagined possible. He thought of Elena's face, hard and unforgiving, and understood he had earned every bit of that anger. He thought of Kai's small voice observing, so simply, so honestly, that they shared the same eyes, and felt something shift permanently inside his chest. Whatever it took, however long it required, Damien resolved that night that he would not leave Millbrook until he had found some way to make things right. Not just for Kai's sake, not just for pack politics or bloodline concerns or council pressure, for Elena too, for the woman he had wronged so completely, whose forgiveness he was no longer certain he deserved, but intended to fight for anyway. Morning light spilled through the kitchen window as Elena sat at her small table, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in front of her, her mind still spinning from the night before. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Damien's face crouched down in front of Kai, saw the raw grief in his expression when he realized exactly how much time he had missed. 5 years of birthdays, first days of school, scraped knees and bedtime stories, all of it happening without him while he sat in his castle 1,000 miles away, married to another woman, never once wondering if the bond he rejected had left behind something real. She was angry. She was still, deeply, painfully angry. But somewhere beneath that anger, uncomfortably, was something else too. A tiny, unwelcome flicker of relief that after 5 years of carrying this secret entirely alone, someone else finally knew. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from Mira, her closest friend in Millbrook, a fellow single mother she had met at Kai's preschool, years earlier, who had become something like family, in the absence of any real family of her own. "Everything okay? You seemed off yesterday when I saw you at the store." Elena stared at the message for a long moment before typing back a careful reply. Kai's father showed up last night. The response came almost instantly. "What? Coffee? No. I'm coming over." 20 minutes later, Mira sat across from Elena at the same small kitchen table, her expression a mixture of shock and fierce protectiveness that Elena had always appreciated about her friend. Mira knew the basic shape of Elena's story, knew there had been someone from a world Elena rarely discussed in detail, knew that man had never been part of Kai's life. She did not know the specifics, did not know about wolves or bonds or pack hierarchies, but she knew enough to understand that this development was significant. "So he just showed up," Mira said, stirring sugar into her coffee with more force than necessary. "After 5 years, no warning. Nothing." "He said he didn't know," Elena said quietly, staring down at her own cup. "About Kai. He said if he'd known, things would have been different." "Do you believe him?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, turning the question over carefully. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "Maybe. It doesn't really matter though, does it? He still said what he said. He still made his choice before he knew anything about a baby. That part of it was never about Kai." Mira reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "What did Kai think of him?" Elena's throat tightened. "He noticed they have the same eyes." Mira winced sympathetically. "Oh, honey. I don't know what to do," Elena admitted, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking slightly. "Part of me wants to pack everything up and disappear again, take Kai somewhere new where none of this can touch us. But he's 5 now. He's starting to ask questions about his father, and I can't keep dodging them forever. And even if I run, Damien clearly has resources to find us. He found us here. He'll find us again." "What does he want?" Mira asked. "Did he say?" "He wants to talk," Elena said. "Properly," he said. "He's staying at the inn on Main Street." Mira studied her friend's face carefully. "And what do you want?" The question sat heavy in the quiet kitchen. Elena looked out the window at the small backyard, where Kai's swing set stood, weathered from years of use, a testament to the ordinary, careful life she had built for her son. She thought about the anger still burning in her chest, the old wound of rejection that had never fully healed, and beneath all of that, buried deep, a question she had never let herself ask honestly. What if things had been different? What if Damien had never rejected her at all? She pushed the thought away immediately, unwilling to give it space to grow. That was not the reality they lived in. The reality was a man who had discarded her in front of an entire pack, who was only here now because his son had shown signs of power too significant to ignore. "I want him to understand that Kai is not a prize to be claimed," Elena said finally, her voice steady and certain. "Whatever power Kai has, whatever bloodline runs through him, he's still just a little boy who deserves to be loved for who he is, not what he might become useful for. If Damien can't understand that, then there's no conversation worth having." Mira nodded slowly. "And if he does understand that?" Elena did not have an answer for that question, not yet, and the silence that followed said more than words could have. Later that afternoon, while Kai napped and Mira had returned home, Elena found herself standing outside the small inn on Main Street, her heart pounding, with a strange mixture of dread and determination. She had told herself she would wait for Damien to come back to her, on her terms, in her own space, where she felt some measure of control, but sitting alone in her house all day, replaying the previous night's conversation over and over, had become unbearable. Some things needed to be said directly, without her son present to overhear them. She found Damien sitting alone at a small table in the inn's quiet dining room, a cup of coffee in front of him that looked as untouched as her own had been that morning. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face before he quickly stood, pulling out the chair across from him. Elena, I didn't expect. We need to set some ground rules, Elena said, remaining standing, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. If you're going to be part of this conversation about Kai's future, there are things you need to understand first. Damien sat back down slowly, watching her with an intensity that made her chest tighten uncomfortably. I'm listening. Kai does not know what he is yet, Elena said. He knows he's fast and strong, and sometimes people listen to him in strange ways he doesn't fully understand. But he doesn't know about wolves, or packs, or bonds, or any of it. I've kept that from him deliberately, to protect him, and I need you to respect that until I decide he's ready to know more. All right, Damien said quietly. I can respect that. Second, Elena continued, whatever happens between us, whatever the Pack Council might want or expect, Kai's well-being comes first. Not pack politics, not succession concerns, not whatever pressure you're facing back home. If you're here because you need an heir and nothing more, I want you to leave now, before he gets attached to the idea of having a father who might disappear the moment it becomes inconvenient again. Something flashed across Damien's face at those words, something that looked almost like pain. That's not why I'm here, he said, his voice low and rough. I won't pretend the council isn't asking questions, because they are, but that's not why I got in a car and drove 2 days to find you. I'm here because I have a son I didn't know existed, and because I owe you an apology I should have found a way to deliver years ago, if I'd had any idea you needed one. Elena studied his face carefully, searching for the calculation she expected to find there, the political maneuvering she had braced herself against. She found something else instead. Exhaustion, genuine regret, a man who looked, for the first time since she had known him, uncertain of himself. She was not ready to trust it, not yet. 5 years of careful self-protection did not dissolve in a single conversation over untouched coffee in a quiet inn. But something in her, some small and cautious part, allowed itself to consider, for just a moment, that this conversation might not end the way she had assumed it would when she walked through the door. We'll see, she said finally, her voice guarded, but no longer entirely closed. Give it time, Damien. Actions, not words. That's what I need to see from you now. Damien nodded slowly, holding her gaze with a steadiness that, despite everything, she found herself unable to look away from. Then I'll give you both all the time you need, he said quietly. For as long as it takes. Outside the window, the afternoon light shifted slowly toward evening, and somewhere across town, a small boy slept peacefully in his bed, entirely unaware that his quiet, ordinary world was about to change in ways he could not yet begin to imagine. Word travels fast in a pack, even across 1,000 miles of distance, and it did not take long for whispers to reach Blackthorn territory that their alpha had left in search of something, or someone, he had never publicly acknowledged before. Celine Cole heard the rumors first from her own household staff. Careful, hesitant whispers about Damien's sudden unexplained departure, about Garrick's tense meetings with a handful of trusted advisors, about a name from the past that nobody wanted to say too loudly. By the time she confronted Garrick directly in his study, demanding answers, she had already pieced together enough to guess the shape of the truth, even if she did not yet know all the details. There's a child, Garrick admitted finally, seeing no benefit in further denial. From before your marriage. Damien only just learned of his existence. Celine absorbed this information with the same careful composure she brought to everything, though Garrick noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. The only outward sign of the storm he suspected was churning beneath her controlled exterior. And this child, Celine said slowly, carries Blackthorn bloodline strong enough to matter. Strong enough that the council will demand answers the moment word fully spreads, Garrick confirmed. Which is why Damien wanted to handle this quietly, before speculation turns into political chaos. Celine was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window of Garrick's study, toward the dark tree line surrounding the compound. Her marriage to Damien had never been built on affection, and both of them had always understood this plainly, entering into their union with clear eyes about its purpose. But 2 years of trying and failing to produce an heir had worn on her more than she ever allowed herself to admit publicly. Each failed month a fresh reminder of expectations she could not fulfill, expectations that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with her value, within a system that measured women largely by their ability to secure a bloodline's future. Now, apparently, that bloodline already had an heir, one that existed entirely outside their marriage, born to a woman Damien had rejected before Celine had even entered the picture. "What happens to me?" Celine asked quietly, "if this child is confirmed?" Garrick did not have a comfortable answer for her, and they both knew it. Pack law was clear on matters of true bloodline succession, and no political marriage, however strategically valuable, could override a confirmed biological heir with sufficient power and legitimate claim. If Kai's identity was confirmed, Celine's position within Blackthorn's future would shift dramatically, regardless of her marriage to Damien. "I don't know," Garrick admitted honestly. "That will depend on many factors still unfolding, but I would encourage patience and caution before drawing conclusions that might not serve you well in the long run." Celine left his study without further comment, though her mind raced through implications long after the conversation ended. She was not a cruel woman, and some quiet part of her, surprisingly, felt sympathy for a child she had never met, caught up in circumstances entirely beyond his control. But she was also a woman who had spent her entire life being taught that survival required strategic thinking, and she could not entirely silence the calculating voice in the back of her mind, already considering what this development might mean for her own future within, or beyond, Blackthorn's walls. Meanwhile, in Millbrook, the days that followed Elena and Damien's conversation at the inn settled into an uneasy but careful rhythm. Damien did not push. True to his word, he gave Elena space, staying in town without demanding immediate access to Kai's life, though Elena could sense the effort this restraint required of him every time she saw him glance toward her house from across the street, or linger near the school pickup line at a respectful distance, watching his son from afar with an expression of quiet, aching longing that Elena found herself, despite everything, unable to remain entirely unmoved by. It was Kai, in the end, who broke the careful standoff between them. "Mommy," he said one evening, looking up from his dinner plate with the sudden directness only children possess, "is that man my daddy?" Elena set down her fork slowly, her heart hammering. She had known this question was coming, had braced herself for it since the moment Damien appeared on their porch, but hearing it spoken aloud in her son's small, curious voice still caught her completely off guard. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" she asked gently, buying herself a moment to think. "He has my eyes," Kai said simply, as though this were the most obvious evidence in the world, which, Elena supposed, in a 5-year-old's straightforward logic, it absolutely was. "And he looks at me, the way you look at me sometimes, like he's happy and sad at the same time." Elena felt tears sting unexpectedly behind her own eyes at her son's simple, devastatingly accurate observation. She reached across the table and took his small hand in hers. "Yes," she said finally, deciding that honesty, carefully delivered, was better than continued avoidance. "He is your daddy. His name is Damien. He didn't know about you until very recently, which is why you haven't met him before now, but he wants to get to know you, if that's something you'd like too." Kai considered this information with the same thoughtful seriousness he applied to most things, tilting his head slightly. "Is he a good person?" The question hung in the air, simple and impossible all at once. Elena thought about her own complicated feelings, the anger and hurt that still lived somewhere beneath her ribs, tangled together now with something more uncertain, something she was not ready to examine too closely. "I think he's trying to be," she said finally, choosing her words with careful honesty. "People can make mistakes, big ones, and still work hard to become better afterward. I think that's what he's trying to do now." Kai nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with this answer in the straightforward way children often are, before returning his attention to his dinner plate, as though the conversation had settled something important in his own small heart. "Can I meet him properly then? Not just at school pickup where he thinks I don't see him watching." Elena's breath caught. "You notice that?" "He's not very sneaky," Kai said with the blunt honesty of a 5-year-old, and despite everything, Elena found herself laughing softly, a small release of tension she had been carrying for days. That weekend, Elena arranged a careful, supervised meeting at the small park near their house, choosing neutral, public ground where she felt some measure of control over the situation. Damien arrived exactly on time, dressed simply, None of the imposing authority she remembered from their first meeting years ago, visible in his posture now. Instead, he looked almost nervous, which struck Elena as strange coming from a man who commanded an entire pack without hesitation. Kai approached him cautiously at first, studying him with careful curiosity from a few feet away, before gradually closing the distance as Damien knelt down to his level, speaking softly, asking simple questions about Kai's favorite games and stories, rather than anything overwhelming or complicated. Elena watched from a nearby bench, arms crossed, heart aching in ways she did not fully understand, as she witnessed her son's careful, growing trust in a man she had spent 5 years trying to protect him from. There was something painful about watching it happen, something that stirred old grief alongside a new, cautious hope she was not ready to name. By the end of the afternoon, Kai was laughing at something Damien had said, showing him proudly how high he could climb on the playground equipment, while Damien watched with an expression of such open, unguarded wonder that Elena had to look away, unable to bear witnessing it directly. Whatever happened next, whatever complications pack politics and council pressure might bring, Elena understood in that quiet park, watching her son and his father together for the first time, that there was no going back now. The careful, isolated world she had built for the two of them had cracked open permanently, and there was no telling yet what would grow in the space that had been left behind. The letter arrived on a rainy Thursday morning, delivered by a courier Elena did not recognize, addressed formally to Damien, at the inn where he was still staying. Elena happened to be there when it arrived, dropping off a container of soup for Kai, who had caught a mild cold and was recovering at Mira's house for the afternoon, while Elena ran errands. She watched Damien's expression darken as he read the letter, his jaw tightening in the way she remembered from years ago, the particular stillness that settled over him whenever something threatened his careful control. "What is it?" she asked, unable to help herself despite her general policy of maintaining distance from Blackthorn's internal affairs. "The council," Damien said grimly, setting the letter down on the table between them. "They know I've been gone longer than a simple business matter would require. They're demanding I return within the week to explain myself, or they'll begin their own investigation into my absence." Elena felt a familiar tightness in her chest. "And if they investigate?" "They'll find Kai," Damien said quietly. "Faster than I'd like, and with far less care than I intend to bring to this." Elena sat down slowly across from him, her earlier errands forgotten. "What does that mean for us? For him?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, rubbing a hand across his face, in a gesture of exhaustion that looked almost foreign, on someone she had always associated with rigid, unwavering control. "It means I owe you the truth about everything, right now, whether either of us feels ready for that conversation or not." Elena braced herself, some instinct warning her that whatever came next would be difficult to hear. 5 years ago, Damien began slowly, my father had been dead only 3 months when the bond between us formed. I became alpha earlier than anyone expected, earlier than I was prepared for, and the council was already questioning whether I had the strength to hold Blackthorn together. There were whispers, even then, about rivals watching for weakness, waiting for any excuse to challenge my position. He paused, his eyes distant, clearly reliving a memory he had rarely allowed himself to revisit so directly. "When the bond formed with you, an Omega, with no pack behind you, no political alliance to offer, no strength beyond the accident of fate, the council saw it as exactly the kind of weakness they'd been waiting for. My closest advisor at the time, not Garrick, someone else who has since been removed from his position, told me directly that accepting the bond would be seen as proof I was unfit to lead, that rivals would use it against me, that Blackthorn's stability, only months into my leadership, could not survive the appearance of weakness. So you rejected me to protect your position," Elena said quietly, the old pain resurfacing sharply despite the years that had passed. "I rejected you because I was terrified," Damien said, and something in his voice cracked slightly, an admission that seemed to cost him considerable effort. "Terrified of losing control of a pack I'd inherited far too young. Terrified of proving every doubt anyone had ever voiced about my ability to lead. I told myself I was making a strategic decision, but the truth is, I was scared, and I let that fear make a decision that hurt you in ways I didn't fully understand, until I saw Kai's face on your porch, and realized exactly what I'd thrown away." Elena sat in silence, absorbing his words, feeling the old anger inside her shift and reshape itself into something more complicated. She had spent 5 years imagining Damien as simply cold, calculating, incapable of the vulnerability he was displaying now. Hearing him admit to fear, to genuine terror beneath the cruel words he had spoken, did not erase the pain he had caused her, but it complicated the simple narrative she had built to protect herself. "That doesn't undo what happened," she said finally, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotion churning beneath it. "I still stood in that hall and heard you reject me in front of everyone. I still spent months alone, pregnant, terrified, building a life from nothing, because I didn't trust that your pack would ever see my son as anything more than a political asset. That fear you felt, Damien, it became my reality for years." "I know," Damien said quietly. "I'm not asking you to forget any of that. I'm asking you to understand it, so that whatever happens next, you know exactly what you're dealing with. Not a monster who discarded you without thought, but a frightened young man who made a terrible choice, and has spent 5 years slowly understanding just how terrible it truly was." Elena studied his face carefully, searching for any hint of manipulation, any calculated attempt to win her sympathy for strategic purposes. She found, instead, only exhaustion and genuine regret. A man finally confronting a truth he had avoided for far too long. "What happens now?" she asked, "with the council demanding your return?" Damien's expression turned serious again, the vulnerability shifting back toward the careful control she was more familiar with. "I have a choice to make. I can return alone, buy myself time, and try to control how information about Kai reaches the council on my own terms. Or I can bring the two of you with me, and face whatever comes directly, together. That's not really a choice you get to make alone," Elena said firmly. "Whatever happens involves Kai's life too, and I won't have decisions about his future made without my full agreement." "I know that," Damien said, "which is exactly why I'm telling you all of this now, instead of simply making a decision and presenting it to you afterward. I don't want to repeat the mistake I made 5 years ago, deciding something that affects both of you without giving you any voice in the outcome." Elena considered this for a long moment, weighing the careful trust she had begun, cautiously, reluctantly, to extend toward him against the very real dangers a pack council might pose to her son's safety and autonomy. "If we come with you," she said slowly, "I need guarantees. Kai is not a political tool. He's not a bargaining chip for pack stability. Whatever happens with succession, with bloodline claims, with council politics, his well-being comes first, always, no exceptions." "I understand," Damien said, "and I'll fight for those guarantees myself, even if it means fighting my own council to secure them." "That might not be enough," Elena said honestly. "Your council rejected me once already, because I had no power to offer. What makes you think they'll treat Kai any differently, especially once they realize how much power he actually carries?" Damien was quiet for a moment, considering her question seriously rather than dismissing it. "I don't know," he admitted finally, "but I know that hiding from this problem won't make it disappear. Sooner or later, the council will learn about Kai, regardless of what either of us decides now. The only real choice we have is whether we face that reality on our own terms, prepared and united, or whether we let it catch us unprepared and scrambling to protect him after the fact." Elena stared out the rain-streaked window of the inn's dining room, thinking of her son, currently recovering from a cold at Mira's house, blissfully unaware of the complicated political storm gathering around his young life. She thought of the careful, isolated safety she had built for him over 5 years, and the uncomfortable truth that this safety had always been temporary, dependent on remaining hidden from a world that would eventually find them, regardless of how carefully she tried to disappear. "Give me a few days," she said finally. "I need to think, and I need to talk to Kai in a way he can understand, at least partially, about what might be coming." "Take whatever time you need," Damien said. "I'll delay the council as long as I can." As Elena rose to leave, gathering her coat against the rain outside, Damien spoke again, his voice quiet but sincere. "Elena, whatever you decide, I want you to know that I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I haven't earned that yet, and I don't expect it simply because I've finally told you the truth. I'm asking for the chance to try to earn it, slowly, through actions rather than words, that's all." Elena paused at the door, looking back at him for a long moment, seeing not the cold, distant alpha who had rejected her 5 years ago, but a man visibly working to become someone better, someone worthy of the son he had only just discovered. "We'll see," she said again, the same careful words she had offered him days earlier, though this time, something in her voice carried slightly less guarded certainty, slightly more room for the possibility of change. She stepped out into the rain, her mind racing through decisions that would shape not just her own future, but her son's entire life. And somewhere behind her, in the quiet warmth of the inn's dining room, Damien sat alone, with the weight of a council deadline pressing down on him, and the fragile, precious hope that he might still find a way to make things right. 3 days later, Elena made her decision. She sat Kai down at the kitchen table on a quiet Sunday morning, choosing her words as carefully as she could manage, trying to explain a world of pacts and bonds and pack councils in terms a 5-year-old could begin to grasp, without becoming overwhelmed or frightened. "Remember how I told you that some people are a little different," she began gently. "Like how you're sometimes faster and stronger than other kids your age, and sometimes people listen to you in a special way?" Kai nodded seriously, giving her his full attention in the way he always did when he sensed something important was happening. "Your daddy is part of a very old community of people like that," Elena continued. "They call themselves a pack, and your daddy is their leader. That means a lot of people look up to him, and depend on him, and sometimes that means there are complicated rules and expectations that come with being part of his family." "Am I part of his family now?" Kai asked, his eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear, which eased some of Elena's worry. "You always have been," Elena said softly, "even before he knew about you. But now that he does know, some of his community wants to meet you too, and they might ask a lot of questions, and things might feel a little different for a while, as everyone adjusts to this new situation." "Will you be there?" Kai asked, his small hand finding hers across the table. "If we go meet them?" "Every step of the way," Elena promised, squeezing his hand firmly. "I am not going anywhere, and neither of us has to do anything we're not ready for. We're going to figure this out together, at whatever pace feels right for you." Kai considered this for a long moment before nodding decisively. "Okay, I want to meet them, and I want to see where my daddy lives." 2 weeks later, Elena, Kai, and Damien arrived together at Blackthorn territory, Damien having spent the intervening time carefully preparing his counsel for the reality of what was coming, framing the situation with as much control as he could manage, while still preserving honesty about the essential facts. The pack compound looked exactly as intimidating as Elena remembered, stone buildings rising among ancient trees, the great hall where she had once stood and heard her own rejection spoken aloud in front of an entire community still standing at the center of it all. Walking back through those gates, holding her son's hand tightly, Elena felt old fear rising alongside a new, fierce determination to protect him from whatever judgment or scrutiny awaited inside. Garrick met them at the entrance, his expression carefully neutral, though Elena noticed the way his eyes softened slightly when they landed on Kai. "Alpha," he said formally to Damien, before turning to Elena with an unexpected bow of respect. "Elena, welcome back to Blackthorn." The Pack Council convened that same evening, and Elena stood beside Damien in the Great Hall, Kai held protectively close against her side, facing rows of Pack elders and advisors whose expressions ranged from cautious curiosity to open skepticism. Celine stood among them too, her composed expression revealing little of whatever she was truly feeling, as she watched her husband stand publicly alongside the woman and child who threatened to reshape her entire future within the Pack. An elder named Nora, a stern woman with sharp, calculating eyes, was the first to speak. "Alpha Voss, you've brought before this council a claim that could reshape Blackthorn's entire succession. Before we proceed further, we require confirmation. Is this child truly of your bloodline, and does he truly carry the power Owen reported witnessing?" Damien's hand found Elena's shoulder, a small, steadying gesture of solidarity. "He is my son," Damien said firmly, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "There is no question of that. As for his power, I invite this council to witness it themselves, if they require proof beyond my word." Nora's sharp gaze moved to Kai, who stood very still beside his mother, clearly uncertain, but trying hard to appear brave in front of so many unfamiliar faces. "Very well," she said. "Let us see. What followed was, to Elena's mind, an uncomfortably clinical demonstration, though Damien had warned her something like this might be necessary to satisfy the council's demand for proof. 2 young pack warriors were brought forward, instructed to engage in a minor training dispute, shoving and posturing in a display clearly designed to provoke exactly the kind of reaction Owen had witnessed weeks earlier in that quiet Millbrook park. Kai, sensing the tension in the room, the careful attention of dozens of unfamiliar adults watching him, hesitated at first, glancing up at Elena with uncertain eyes. She knelt down quickly, ignoring the formality of the setting, and spoke softly, just for him. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do," she whispered. "But if you feel like something is wrong, and you want to help, trust yourself. You already know how." Kai nodded slowly, straightened his small shoulders, and looked toward the 2 warriors, still posturing in mock conflict at the center of the hall. "Stop," he said, his voice small but carrying that same unmistakable undertone Owen had witnessed weeks earlier. Both warriors froze instantly, exactly as instructed, their bodies responding to the command before their minds could process it consciously. A ripple of stunned murmurs moved through the assembled council, and even Nora's carefully controlled expression flickered with genuine surprise. "Extraordinary," she murmured, almost to herself, before addressing the full hall. "This council formally acknowledges Kai as legitimate heir to Blackthorn, carrying confirmed bloodline power consistent with alpha lineage." The words settled over the hall with weighty significance, and Elena felt Kai press closer against her side, overwhelmed by the sudden attention and formal declaration surrounding him. She wrapped a protective arm around him, glancing toward Damien, who was watching his son with an expression of fierce, protective pride that Elena found herself, despite everything, unable to fully resent. But not everyone in the hall shared in the visible relief following the council's declaration. Elena noticed several pack members exchanging uneasy glances, whispered conversations passing quickly between them, and understood immediately that formal acknowledgement of Kai's status did not mean automatic acceptance from everyone within Blackthorn's community. There would be those who saw a young, powerful heir as opportunity for their own political maneuvering, those who resented the disruption to expectations they had built around Damien and Celine's marriage, those who might see a 5-year-old as nothing more than a piece to be positioned advantageously within larger power struggles they cared nothing about. As the council meeting concluded and pack members began filing out of the hall, still whispering among themselves, Damien knelt down in front of Kai, speaking quietly enough that only the 3 of them could hear. "You did wonderfully," he said softly. "I know that was scary, having so many people watching you like that." "Why did they need me to do that?" Kai asked, his voice small and slightly confused. "Was it a test?" Damien's expression grew serious, and Elena appreciated, despite her lingering wariness, that he did not attempt to soften the truth into something more comfortable than reality warranted. "In a way, yes," he admitted. "This pack needed proof that you truly carry the power that comes with being my son, because that power means important responsibilities someday, and they needed to understand what they were dealing with. I'm sorry it felt like a test. You deserve better than being put on display like that, and I'm going to work hard to make sure it doesn't happen again." Kai considered this explanation with the same thoughtful seriousness he brought to most things, before nodding slowly. "Okay, as long as I don't have to do it again, unless I want to." "You have my word," Damien said firmly, and Elena, watching this exchange, felt something in her chest loosen slightly, some small measure of the constant vigilance she had carried for years, easing just a fraction, though she remained far from fully trusting the safety of the world they had just stepped into. That night, in the guest quarters Damien had arranged for them within the compound, Elena tucked Kai into an unfamiliar bed, staying beside him until his breathing evened into sleep, exhausted from the overwhelming events of the day. She sat quietly afterward in the dim light, thinking about everything that had happened, the formal acknowledgement, the uneasy whispers among pack members, the uncertain road still stretching ahead of them. Whatever safety and certainty she had once found in their small, hidden life in Millbrook was gone now, replaced by something far more complicated and uncertain. But watching her son sleep peacefully despite everything he had faced that day, Elena found a stubborn thread of hope woven through her worry. Kai had faced an intimidating hall full of strangers with more courage than most adults could manage, and had emerged from it still fundamentally himself, curious and thoughtful, and unafraid to ask honest questions. Whatever challenges Blackthorn's pack politics still held in store for them, Elena resolved quietly in the dim light of that unfamiliar room. She would face them the same way she had faced everything else over the past 5 years. Fiercely, carefully, and always, always, with her son's well-being as her first and only true priority. The weeks that followed brought a steady, careful rhythm to life inside Blackthorn territory, though beneath the surface, calm, tension continued to simmer among certain factions of the Pack Council. Elena and Kai remained in the guest quarters Damien had arranged, close enough to the main compound for regular contact, but separate enough that Elena still felt some measure of independence and control over their daily lives. She began, slowly and cautiously, to learn more about the world Damien belonged to, attending informal gatherings, meeting pack members whose warmth and welcome felt genuine, and others whose careful politeness masked clear underlying wariness about the sudden shift in Blackthorn's succession. Celine, to Elena's surprise, proved unexpectedly gracious throughout the transition. The two women met formally within the first week, an encounter Elena had dreaded, expecting resentment or hostility from a woman whose marriage now stood in uncertain territory because of circumstances entirely outside her control. Instead, Celine had approached the meeting with calm, measured honesty. "I won't pretend this situation doesn't complicate things for me," she admitted, sitting across from Elena in a quiet sitting room away from prying ears. "But I've spent 2 years in a marriage without any real bond, watching everyone around me whisper about my failure to produce an heir that was never going to come from a union built entirely on strategy rather than fate. If anything, this might finally free me from expectations I never wanted to carry in the first place. What will you do?" Elena had asked, genuinely curious. "I don't know yet," Celine admitted, "but for the first time in years, that uncertainty feels more like possibility than failure. Your son deserves a chance at a real family, Elena. I won't stand in the way of that, whatever the council ultimately decides about my own position here." The conversation had left Elena unexpectedly moved, and though the two women would never be close friends given the complicated circumstances connecting them, a quiet mutual respect began to develop between them over the following weeks, something Elena had not anticipated finding within Blackthorn's walls. Damien, meanwhile, threw himself into the difficult, humbling work of proving himself worthy of a role he had never expected to hold, father, rather than simply alpha. He learned Kai's favorite foods, his preferred bedtime stories, the particular way he liked his shoes tied, and his hair combed before school. He attended every small moment he could manage around his demanding pack duties, showing up consistently, reliably, in ways that slowly, gradually, began to erode the careful wall Elena had built around her heart. It was not a smooth or simple process. There were difficult days too, moments when old resentment resurfaced sharply, when Elena watched Damien interact easily with pack members whose respect he commanded effortlessly, and remembered with painful clarity the moment he had stood in that very hall and rejected her without a second thought. Trust, once broken so completely, did not rebuild itself quickly or without setbacks. One particular evening, several weeks into their time at Blackthorn, tension boiled over unexpectedly. Elena had overheard, quite by accident, a conversation between two pack elders discussing Kai's future training, debating timelines and expectations for developing his abilities that treated her son more like a strategic asset to be optimized than a child who deserved a normal, gentle childhood, alongside whatever pack responsibilities eventually came his way. She confronted Damien directly that night, her old anger resurfacing sharply. "He is 5 years old," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "I did not agree to bring him here, so your council could start planning his entire future, like he's some kind of investment to be managed. Elena, I promise you, I have not authorized any accelerated training plans. But you haven't stopped them either, have you?" Elena pressed. "You haven't made it clear to your council that Kai's childhood matters more than their succession planning." Damien's expression tightened, old defensive instincts flickering briefly before he visibly forced himself to soften, to actually hear what she was saying rather than immediately defending himself. "You're right," he said finally, surprising her. "I've been so focused on managing the political fallout of all this that I haven't been vigilant enough about protecting the actual boundaries that matter most. That's on me, and I'll fix it immediately." True to his word, Damien called an emergency council meeting the following morning, addressing the assembled elders with a firmness Elena had not witnessed from him since their earliest, tensest interactions. Kai's development as a future leader of this pack will happen at a pace appropriate for his age and well-being, not according to any accelerated timeline this council feels pressure to establish, he stated clearly. Anyone who attempts to circumvent that boundary will answer directly to me. Am I understood? The message landed clearly among the assembled elders, and while Elena could not be certain every whispered concern about efficiency and preparation had been fully silenced, she appreciated the visible, public stand Damien had taken on her son's behalf, a stark contrast to the silence he had offered her 5 years earlier when it truly mattered. That evening, after Kai had gone to sleep, Damien found Elena sitting alone on the small balcony outside the guest quarters, staring out at the dark forest surrounding the compound. "Thank you," she said quietly as he approached, "for what you did today." "I should have been more careful from the start," Damien said, settling into the chair beside her. "I keep thinking I understand what it means to protect him, but I'm still learning, still catching up on 5 years I don't have any way to get back." Elena was quiet for a long moment, watching moonlight filter through the trees. "You can't get those years back," she said finally, her voice softer than it had been in previous difficult conversations. "But you're here now. And I've been watching you, Damien, watching how you show up for him every single day, even when it's inconvenient, even when pack business pulls you in a dozen directions at once. That matters. It's starting to matter, to both of us." Damien turned to look at her, something vulnerable and hopeful flickering across his face in the dim moonlight. "Does that mean," he asked carefully, "there might be room, eventually, for something like forgiveness?" Elena considered the question honestly, searching her own heart for a truthful answer, rather than simply offering reassurance he wanted to hear. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "The wound you caused was deep, Damien, deeper than I think you fully understood, until you saw the consequences standing in front of you on our porch. Forgiveness like that doesn't happen overnight, and I won't pretend otherwise, just to make this easier for either of us." "I understand," Damien said quietly. "I'm not asking you to rush anything. I just needed to know if the door was still open, even a little." Elena looked at him for a long moment, considering everything they had been through together over the past weeks, the slow, careful rebuilding of trust that had begun, despite everything standing against it. "It's open," she said finally. "Just don't expect me to walk through it quickly. Some things take time to heal properly, and I owe it to myself, and to Kai, to make sure that healing is real, before I let myself fully trust it." Damien nodded, accepting her honesty without pushing further, and the two of them sat together in comfortable, if still cautious, silence, watching moonlight shift slowly across the dark forest canopy stretching out before them, each lost in their own thoughts about the uncertain, but increasingly hopeful path still unfolding ahead. The formal ceremony took place on a clear autumn afternoon, 6 months after Elena and Kai had first arrived at Blackthorn, in the same great hall where Elena had once stood and heard the words that shattered her world completely. This time, the hall was decorated differently, warm golden light streaming through tall windows. Pack members gathered not with cold curiosity, but genuine anticipation for what everyone understood would be a historic moment in Blackthorn's long history. Word had spread throughout the pack over the preceding months, not just of Kai's confirmed bloodline and extraordinary power, but of the careful, patient way Damien had rebuilt trust with both his son and the woman he had once rejected so publicly in this very room. Elena stood near the front of the hall, dressed simply but with quiet dignity, watching as pack members found their places, murmurs of anticipation rippling through the crowd. So much had changed since her last time standing in this space. The careful walls she had built around her heart had not entirely disappeared, but they had softened considerably, worn down gradually by 6 months of consistent, patient effort from a man determined to prove that his transformation was genuine rather than merely convenient. Celine stood nearby as well, her own path forward now clearer, following a mutual, amicable decision she and Damien had reached weeks earlier to formally end their political marriage, freeing both of them to pursue lives more aligned with their genuine circumstances. Celine had already begun discussions with a neighboring pack about a potential alliance built on more promising foundations, and she caught Elena's eye across the hall now, offering a small, genuine smile of goodwill that Elena returned warmly. Damien entered the hall then, dressed formally, his expression composed, but with none of the cold, distant authority Elena remembered from years earlier. Beside him walked Kai, 6 months older now, more confident in his surroundings, dressed in a small formal outfit that made him look, Elena thought with a rush of overwhelming love, achingly grown up, despite still being only 5 years old. The two of them walked to the center of the hall together, and the assembled pack fell into respectful silence, waiting to witness whatever Damien had planned for this historic gathering. To everyone's visible surprise, including Elena's own, Damien did not move toward the raised chair at the front of the hall, the same seat he had occupied years earlier when he delivered his devastating rejection. Instead, he knelt down, directly in front of Kai, in full view of the entire assembled pack. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. An alpha kneeling before anyone, let alone a child, was almost unheard of in Blackthorn's long history, a gesture so unprecedented that even the most experienced elders exchanged startled glances. "Kai," Damien said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, steady, despite the emotion visible in his expression. "6 months ago, I met you for the first time, and I understood immediately that I had missed years of your life that I can never fully get back. Today, I stand before this entire pack, and before you, to formally name you heir to Blackthorn, not because pack law requires it, though it does, but because you have shown me, every single day since we met, exactly what kind of leader this pack deserves someday. Someone thoughtful, someone brave, someone who asks honest questions and cares deeply about doing what's right, even when it's difficult." Kai listened with wide, serious eyes, clearly understanding the weight of the moment, even if the full political implications remained beyond his young understanding. "But before this pack can formally recognize you," Damien continued, "I need to ask you something important. Something that has nothing to do with pack law or succession, and everything to do with what actually matters most to me. I know I made a terrible mistake 5 years ago, one that hurt your mother deeply, and cost both of us years we can never reclaim. I am asking for your permission, Kai, as much as I hope to earn your mother's forgiveness eventually, to keep trying to be the father you deserve, every single day, for as long as you'll let me." The hall remained utterly silent, every pack member watching this extraordinary scene unfold, an alpha kneeling before his young son, asking permission rather than simply claiming authority, as pack tradition might have allowed him to do. Kai considered the question with the same thoughtful seriousness he brought to everything important, his young face uncharacteristically solemn for a moment, before something warm and open broke across his expression. "You already are trying," Kai said simply, his clear young voice carrying easily through the silent hall. "Every day I see it, so yes, you can keep trying, for as long as you want." The words, so simple and honest, coming from a child too young to fully understand the complicated politics and history surrounding this moment, but old enough to recognize genuine effort when he saw it, settled over the hall with quiet, powerful weight. Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks, despite her best efforts to maintain composure, watching her son offer a forgiveness that the adults in the room, herself included, had struggled for months to fully extend. Damien's own composure broke slightly at his son's words, emotion visible openly on his face, in a way Elena had never witnessed from him before, not even in their most private, vulnerable conversations. He pulled Kai into a careful embrace, and the assembled pack erupted into warm applause, the formal ceremony completing itself in a way that felt less like political succession and more like genuine, hard-won family reconciliation. Later that evening, after the formal ceremony had concluded and pack members had gradually dispersed into celebration throughout the compound, Damien found Elena standing quietly on the same balcony where they had shared their honest conversation months earlier. "You didn't have to do that," Elena said softly as he approached. "Kneel before him like that, in front of the entire pack. That took real courage." "He deserved it," Damien said simply, settling beside her at the balcony railing. "More than that, though. I needed to do it. I needed him, and you, and this entire pack, to understand clearly that whatever authority I hold, it means nothing if I can't first be someone worthy of trust within my own family." Elena studied his face carefully in the soft evening light, seeing not the cold, distant alpha who had once discarded her without a second thought, but a man who had spent 6 months proving, through consistent action, rather than empty words, that genuine change was possible. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about what you asked me weeks ago, about whether there might be room for something like forgiveness eventually." Damien turned to face her fully, something hopeful and cautious flickering in his expression. "And I think," Elena said, her voice steady, despite the vulnerability of what she was about to admit, "that watching you kneel before our son today, watching you ask his permission rather than simply claiming authority, showed me something I needed to see. You're not the same man who stood in that hall 5 years ago. You've done the work, Damien, real work, not just words meant to smooth things over." "Does that mean," Damien asked carefully, "there might be a chance for us too, not just as parents raising Kai together, but as something more?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the same careful honesty she had brought to every difficult conversation between them over the past 6 months. "I think," she said finally, a small, genuine smile beginning to form, despite the weight of everything they had been through together, "that I'd like to find out. Slowly, carefully, on terms that honor everything we've both learned about trust and patience these past months." Damien's answering smile held none of the cold, guarded authority she remembered from their earliest interactions, only warm, genuine relief and hope. "Slowly and carefully," he agreed. "Whatever pace you need, I'm not going anywhere, Elena. Not this time. Not ever again." Below the balcony, the sound of pack celebration continued softly into the evening, warm laughter and music drifting up through the cool autumn air, while somewhere inside the compound, a 5-year-old boy slept peacefully, unaware that his simple, honest words had helped heal a wound 5 years in the making, bringing together not just a father and son separated by circumstance, but a family finally given the chance to build something real, something lasting, from the broken pieces of a rejection that had once seemed impossible to overcome. Elena leaned against the balcony railing beside Damien, watching the stars emerge slowly across the darkening sky above Blackthorn territory, and for the first time in 5 long years, allowed herself to feel something she had almost forgotten was possible. Genuine, unguarded hope for the future stretching out ahead of her and her son, together, finally, as the family they had always deserved to be.